Welcome to the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast. Today we're sharing our second monthly special, something a little different from our usual stories. This episode takes us into the world of publishing with a focus on the Middle East. Our guest is Trevor Naylor, a writer and publisher who spent the last 30 years living and working in Cairo. He's been in the book industry for over 40 years, and his career has taken him to more than 90 countries. I caught up with him at the London Book Fair, where he shared his insights into the Middle Eastern publishing landscape, its stories and its enduring influence. Let's hear from him.
My name's Trevor Naylor. My connection with Flame Tree is that I sell their books and products in the Middle East, a region I've been heavily involved in and publishing and writing for the past 30 years. I've been in books, bookselling and publishing since I left school at the age of 18. Started working in a bookshop, became a sales guide, selling things in the UK and then ended up in the Middle East. And now I'm selling books in the Middle East, but I'm back living in Yorkshire.
Yeah, and you're within the creative space of the book world as well as a writer.
Yes, I am indeed. Yeah, that's so. I find myself in the latter stages of my normal working career. I started to write books about 10 years ago. I was living in Egypt and working in an Egyptian publishing house and ran a chain of bookstores there, and identified, because from what our customers were saying, certain books about Egypt were needed that didn't exist. And so I thought the easiest way to put that right was to write them myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how long were you living in Egypt for?
So I first went to Egypt in 1987. I'd been a bookseller in the UK. I'd literally never been on an aeroplane or travelled anywhere. And in publishing, we have a journal called The Bookseller, which comes out every week. It's like the industry trade newspaper. And one day there was an advert at the back page saying bookstore manager wanted in Cairo.
And that's how you got...
And I applied for it and I got it.
Oh, wow.
And then 3 months later I was living in Egypt.
And when you applied, were you thinking, oh, this is just a funny thing to apply to? Or were you thinking, I could do that? I mean, you obviously did do it. So
Yeah. Well, one of my earliest jobs, so my first job was working in a very big bookshop in Hull, and I did all different areas there, including managing and really building a huge travel bookshop. And these were in the days when Lonely Planet books were just coming out. They just started to make the first books. And I had all these people coming in and buying these books and going to different places. And it looked great, but I didn't get to do it. And I said, one day I'll get out there. It never occurred to me that I'd be able to go there as a paid job. And then it came along when I saw that. I'd always been fascinated by Egypt anyway. I took the opportunity, and the rest is history, as they say. Yeah.
Were you interested in the Middle East before that, or was that the sort of spark that got you there? I mean, what's the story there?
This is going to sound a bit crazy, but it is true. When I was quite young, I think it was 1973, when Tutankhamun's treasures came to the British Museum. This unbelievable exhibition. I mean, people queued for days, literally, to see that mask. It's the only time it's ever been out of Egypt, and they've said it would never do that again. Mm-hmm. And I used to get a comic every week, and in a comic there was an iron-on transfer of Tutankhamun's mask, which my mum stuck onto my jumper.
Without permission? Just spend for it?
Yeah, and I was walking around, and people would take, kids at school were making jokes about me. But I actually was really interested and very excited about the whole idea of, archaeology and tombs and finding exciting things. When I looked at the places in the world I'd love to go, it was always on my hit list to visit at some point. I never knew I'd end up living there. I certainly didn't expect to end up loving it, really. Yeah. So I was there for 3 years. I started a bookshop there called the American University in Cairo. Had some great successes, published, and I worked with Naguib Mahfouz, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature when I was there. Brought Egyptian bookselling, a bit more fame, but huge tradition, as you can imagine, of literature and writing in Egypt, all the way back to the pharaohs and papyrus, books of the dead, all of that kind of stuff. It was always a fantastic place to work and learn about books and publishing, because generations of families had been doing that.
Yeah. I was going to ask about the literature in the Middle East and what about that, and what your experience with that is.
Well, the Mahfouz winning the Nobel Prize really was a kickstart for publishers outside Egypt wanting to publish Arab authors in translation.
Yeah.
And there weren't many places that understood how to take an Arab novel and turn it into a English book. It's a very tricky translation skill, but that's what happened. And then in my second time in Cairo, which was 2009 onwards, we started a series publishing venture called Hupu, the name of an Egyptian bird, and to translate Arabic writers, award-winning Arabic writers, into English. That became the world's best series, the world's best publishing of Arabic writers. Yeah. And that goes on till today. And it's a very worthwhile venture. Some great writing in there.
And it's sort of what you were saying before about when you had your bookshop and not seeing the kind of writing that you wanted to see, and then choosing to write your own books.
Yeah.
That were important to have. What is it about those books that are necessary, and what are they about, basically?
Okay. My first book, which is still in print, was a book called Cairo Inside Out, and it was triggered by spending a lot of time in Cairo over the years, either as a visitor, selling. When I didn't live there, I was selling books to the Egyptian market from the UK, working for a company called Thames and Hudson then. And what I realised was that when you're in a hot country, you spend most of your time indoors, not outdoors. So with a friend of mine, a photographer, we set out to photograph looking out from places rather than photographing things from the outside, and writing about how it felt to be in those places, historic sites, cafes, beautiful old buildings, where, ancient Egypt, Islamic era, and really to try and capture how the places feel. Yeah. There's a book certainly as much for people who live in Egypt as it was for people outside. Latterly, it's become a bit of a testament to the Cairo that people most loved, because almost inevitably with the change, huge population growth in Egypt, a lot of places that are in that book are no longer with us. They've been bulldozed, closed, and I think there's a lot of great books about Cairo, and this one I'd like to think has found its own special
it's part
place.
Of history now, if it's got those places that are no longer around. But it's such a place of history, myth. I mean, there's a lot of history based in the Middle East. So how does that tie into your writing and your view of the literary sort of landscape there? Yeah.
So having wrote the Cairo book, there was then a request from the rest of the Egyptians. Why can't we have a bigger book with the whole of Egypt? So that took me to Alexandria, of course, Luxor, Aswan, great places with incredible history and fantastic sites. And so I found myself spending much more time in these huge temples and tombs, and learning about. I've also written a book about hieroglyphs, learning to understand what these wall paintings or the paintings, the kind of funerary literature meant. But now latterly I'm writing a book about the myths of ancient Egypt. It's made me realise the role that myths must have played to the Egyptians at the time. We sort of read them, as something from the past, but they were actually the kind of rules and laws by which they lived, because they had to create reasons to do things, or reasons to explain why certain natural phenomena happened. Where did the sun go at night? Where does it come out the morning? Where is it in the hours of darkness? Why does the Nile flood at a certain time? How can we guarantee it floods? Because we might all die if it doesn't, How we behave, I mean, all of these things were given a god to represent it, and as Egypt got more sophisticated, there were more and more gods brought in. Some regional, some became very famous.
Very intricate society and community
Yes.
of gods and all of the explanations.
I mean, at the end of the pharaonic era, there were around 2,300 gods that have been identified.
Could you list them all? You really tried.
Yes. Well, the book I'm writing is pretty comprehensive, and it's only got 90 in it. So
Wow.
but some were very famous, of course, and some
Such
went
an
on.
interesting.
Yeah. So, I think one of the things that I've worked with 3 different publishers now, and one of the vital parts for people listening and wondering how you get published or the best approach is, as a salesperson, by experience, and I've been selling to customers, publishing books and selling books to other booksellers, and if you go to a place and they automatically react to it because you're giving them something they know their customers want. I think if you're a writer, if you can identify a need or you have a speciality that you have a connection with, and then your opportunity to get it to a publisher or an agent and have a positive reaction is all the better.
Yeah, it's sort of knowing
Don't be
that
vague.
before you even start on that journey. That's such a key part of
It is,
the whole process.
And it's not about writing a book against your instinct just to make it saleable. You still have to write the book you want to write, and you have to do it the way you want to do it. But you really do have to say who it's for at the end of the day,
Yeah,
because
you have
that's
to
the
believe
first
in it.
question that people ask.
Yeah.
Who is it for?
Yeah.
And if you can't answer it as the writer, then they haven't got a chance of doing that either.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to go on to the more practical side, so talking as you did about being a salesperson and an agent in the Middle East. What is that sort of experience? I mean, what do you do specifically day to day?
Okay. Well, it's changed tremendously, like everything. I think in the digital era. When I first started travelling, I represented so many famous publishers in the Middle East, and I had a large bag full of catalogues and sample copies, and I went and knocked on bookshop doors and showed them things, which is great, and
you learn a lot
very
that
enjoyable.
way.
Yeah, you do.
Face to face.
They tell you to your face if they don't like something, and equally wonderful and charming people as well. Very welcoming. The Middle East is a wonderful, friendly place, or whatever the media might say. But these days, the technology's changed, and the start point is for the publisher has been very organised. The way that books are. If you take Amazon as the ultimate example of a system, then all the data about that book, the ISBN, which is the number on the back of the book, but also what's in the book, when did it come out, how many pictures are there, all of that kind of stuff. That's what the customer wants fed, because most of them now, as well as having a shop, have a website, and a bit like, people want their books delivered at home as well. So particularly Middle East is a very hot place, and so the way you fashion the presentation of the book at the very beginning, what you say about it, what the cover is and everything, is utterly critical, because, as anyone who looks on any website will know, if you don't grab attention, people just flick on to the next thing. And books have far more competition for people's time than they've ever had before. There's so many other ways that people can, spend their time.
And you've spoken a lot about Egypt, as that's where you lived. What about the other Middle Eastern areas? Their mythology, their writing, their literary
Well,
experience.
Yes, talking about favourite places as far as depth of knowledge about publishing and books. You would have to go to Istanbul, which is another wonderful place. Again, with its own literature and a unique language of its own, of course. Lebanon, has been at times the centre, I guess, of Middle Eastern publishing and distribution, for Arabic books in particular. Egypt we talked about, the Gulf region is relatively new. When I first went to Dubai, 1991, I think it was just a long road with a few buildings on the front of it.
Yeah.
And there's a one shopping centre, I think. That was it. And I go there today and it's like 5 times New York, it's, but it's very different. And further afield, I used to go to Pakistan, another place with wonderful literary heritage from when it was part of India and then became its own country. And the Indians, some incredible book trade. I've been everywhere basically at some point, but the Middle East has been my speciality.
Yeah. And with your, is it new book coming out about the Egyptian mythology?
Yeah.
And the 90 gods you spoke about.
Yeah.
Do you have any favourite folk tales? Which is your god of recommendation for people to learn about?
Well,
there are so many.
Yeah, there are so, and they were so wacky in many ways. That the imagination was fantastic. It's not really a myth, but it is a myth. But it's like one line. There's a god whose name in English is the Great Honker, and he's a goose.
Oh, great.
And this is an Egyptian goose who, in one of the creation myths, lays an egg, and out of that egg, the whole world is created.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is that their creation story?
That's one of their creation stories. They have other creation stories, sort of like the primordial mud out of which the whole earth appeared. A stone comes out of it, and you have birds, and a frog materializes. You have fertility myths that I probably shouldn't talk about too much in here. Yeah, I think you've got to get under the skin of them.
I suppose you need to learn about the whole culture and then how everything intersects.
Yeah. There's a lot of brutality and a lot of, kind of, it's like Succession,
Yeah.
If you look at the main,
Egyptian.
Yes, absolutely. But then you have wonderful story all the way through to the end. People so in Egyptian culture, the pharaoh was a manifestation of gods on earth. Yeah. So, and they would often have a favourite one that they would attach themselves to, because they believed more in what their god's powers were, and they wanted to be associated with them. But they also wanted to be friends with the everyday Egyptians. They wanted to be loved by them, and there were some gods lasted really from the very earliest moment right through and beyond Egypt into Greece and then ancient Rome too. And so when Cleopatra, one of the last pharaohs, came, who wasn't Egyptian, she was from Macedonia, she wanted Egyptians to love her and respect her. So she basically was the goddess Isis associated herself with, and that's who she represented on earth. And Isis then moved, and she was one of the most popular and loved gods anyway. But then the Isis myth spread all around the Mediterranean, and I think even today, the idea of her beauty still remains strong. So,
there's a lot.
There's a lot, and that's half of 1% of how much of it there is to talk about.
Just for the final topic on that, as a whole picture, why do you think it is so important that we continue sharing and platforming this ancient world of mythology? And it is so relevant still. People are still so interested in it.
I'm actually doing a creative writing course, and I'm learning quite a lot about short stories and the modern ways in which young people particularly are writing, things like flash fiction, that's a relatively new concept, and the way they can connect with audiences through social media platforms. They have their own communities, or they can podcast and stuff like that. And myths are that kind of thing. They were brilliant short stories that you could read. Often you can read in 3 or 4 different ways and different levels, depending on how deeply you try to understand them. And they, in a way, they were the first genuine form of fiction, because honestly, the stories in those myths are brilliant pieces of imagination created because there was no logical other reason that people could pin on it. So I think if we go back and look at them and try and measure them against more modern writing, you'll learn a lot. Because the characters as well are quite brilliant, and they're the ones you love, the ones you loathe. I think there's a lot to learn and from the past always.
Yeah, it's a great showcase of the history of human creativity and always trying to come up with something to make life more interesting and something that how to get through, and it makes communities have something in common. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that most ancient civilizations ultimately have a book somewhere. So we have the Book of the Dead, we have the Tibetan Book of the Dead, we have the Bhagavad Gita. That somewhere somebody collects lots of storytelling and puts it then into one kind of book that it's almost like a book of laws for the future. So the printed word has always been important.
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're just continuing that tradition. That's what it is at publishing.
And indeed, you're doing books for people to write their stories into as well.
Yeah, yes. Always looking for new writers. That was really great. It's always fascinating to hear how stories live on. The idea that they're being passed down, changed, retold. It's something we return to again and again in our short story collections. There's always more to learn from the past and more ways to tell it. If you're a writer interested in exploring those kind of themes, we always have open submission calls running. And if Trevor's stories got you curious about ancient Egyptian myths and legends, we have so many collections in our catalogue to get stuck into. Thanks so much again to Trevor.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Flame Tree Myth and Fiction podcast. If you like this podcast, please remember to recommend it to a friend. Goodbye for now.